Before we dive into this spine-chilling story, please subscribe for more daily creepy horror stories. My name is Ethan Harlow. Look, I know it sounds crazy, but hear me out. 2 months ago, my younger sister Lily disappeared, just vanished. She had been working at a bar out in the middle of nowhere, one of those places you only find if you're lost or looking for trouble. It wasn't the kind of place you'd expect to make a career, but Lily always said it was just temporary, a way to save up for her next move. Then one night, she didn't come home. It was a place no one could remember the name of. No one could even describe it, except that it was, in their words, off. Maybe you've heard people use that kind of language. Something felt off, but they couldn't tell you why. I couldn't shake the feeling that something about this bar wasn't right. The police, of course, didn't have any answers. No witnesses, no leads. It was like she'd just stepped off the face of the earth, and I was left with nothing but dead ends and unanswered questions. I wasn't about to let it go, though. I started asking around, chasing whispers of a bar that catered to unusual patrons. Yeah, I know, that sounds ridiculous, like something out of a bad novel. But every lead I followed just got stranger. People wouldn't talk about it, or they'd shut down as soon as I mentioned the name of the place. I swear, the harder I tried to dig, the more I felt like I was getting closer to something I was never supposed to find. Then one night, a letter arrived at my door. No return address, no stamp, just my name scribbled in shaky handwriting across the front. I remember holding it for a moment, feeling the weight of it in my hands. It wasn't heavy, but it felt important. Inside, there was a single piece of paper. No fancy typewriter font, no neatly typed words, just 4 words written in that same trembling handwriting. She's waiting for you. I'll admit, I didn't even think twice. I shoved the letter in my pocket and grabbed my jacket. The address on the paper led me to a desolate stretch of highway. You know, the kind of place where the air feels thick and the only sound you hear is the hum of the tires on the road. No streetlights, just the occasional flicker of the moonlight breaking through the clouds. And there it was, the bar, the midnight vessel. It was glowing faintly, but not like a neon sign or a streetlight. It was like it was there, but maybe not fully. The kind of light you see out of the corner of your eye when you're half awake, like the place didn't quite belong in this world. It shouldn't have been there, but there it was. When I stepped inside, the air felt damp, almost like it had been there for years. The floors creaked under my boots, and the furniture was old, really old. You know the type, with that worn-out feel, but still sturdy enough to sit in. The place smelled like wood, and something I couldn't quite place. Maybe it was the old books or the kind of stale air that settles in when a place hasn't seen daylight in a while. The man behind the bar stood tall, gaunt. His name was Gideon. I figured he was the owner. He barely looked at me when I walked in, just gave me a quick nod and a small, tight-lipped smile. It wasn't warm, wasn't welcoming. More like he was sizing me up, like he knew why I was here, and maybe he wasn't all that thrilled about it. He didn't say much, just handed me a folded sheet of paper. It looked like a set of rules, nothing fancy, just words like they were part of some unspoken agreement I was about to enter into. "Read these," he said quietly, almost as if he were warning me. "You'll get paid in cash at the end of every shift. But remember, mistakes here don't go unnoticed." I didn't ask any questions at first. I was too focused on the fact that this was it. This place, these people, they were my only chance at finding something about Lily. I shoved the paper into my pocket, wanting to get to work, but I couldn't let it go. I needed to know about her. "So about Lily?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but I could hear the desperation in my own voice. "What can you tell me about her? She was here, right?" Gideon's face tightened. I swear, it was like I just crossed some invisible line. His eyes hardened and his lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at me like he was deciding whether or not to answer. Finally, he muttered, "You might find what you're looking for, but tread carefully. This place doesn't forgive mistakes." I wasn't about to back down. No rules, no warnings, nothing was going to stop me from finding out what happened to Lily. I stuffed my hands into my jacket pockets and nodded. Gideon then handed me the sheet of paper again, and as I read, I could feel the weight of each rule sink in. Like they weren't just suggestions, they were laws of this place. Rule 1, always offer a drink before they ask. Rule 2, never touch a customer, no matter what. Rule 3, if a customer sings, cover your ears immediately. Rule 4, if a drink spills, leave the spill untouched. Rule 5, at closing time, check the bar stools. If one is missing, find it before you leave. I was confused, but not questioning him yet. These rules didn't make sense, but what else was I supposed to do? I wasn't going to back down. Not now. I stuffed the rules into my pocket and looked around, wondering where I was supposed to start, what I was supposed to do. And that's when I realized I wasn't leaving this place until I found something. Anything. Even if it meant sticking around for longer than I should. Gideon just watched me from behind the bar, his eyes never leaving mine. There was a strange calm to him, like he knew exactly how this was going to play out. I didn't care. All that mattered was Lily, and maybe, just maybe, this bar held the answers I was looking for. The first few shifts passed without much incident. I spent most of my time cleaning glasses, wiping down the bar, and trying to figure out what exactly made this place tick. The customers were few and far between, but when they did show up, they weren't like anyone I'd ever served before. You know how you can usually read people, figure out their vibe by the way they walk or talk? Not here. These people, if they were even people, were all wrong. Their eyes were the first thing I noticed, too hollow, like they weren't really looking at anything. They just sort of drift in, their movements slow and deliberate, like they were puppets on strings. It was unsettling, but I kept my head down. I didn't want to give anyone, or anything, a reason to notice me too much. By the second night, I'd figured out one of the rules. Always offer a drink before they ask. It seemed harmless enough, almost polite, really. But the way it played out, that was something else. The first time it happened, I was wiping down the counter when I heard the creak of the front door. The sound echoed through the empty bar, sharp enough to make me flinch. I looked up, and there he was, a man in a tattered coat, his face pale and gaunt. He didn't say a word, just shuffled over to one of the stools and sat down, his gaze fixed on the polished wood of the bar. "Hey there," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "What can I get you?" Nothing. No response. He didn't even look at me. He just sat there, his hands resting on the counter, fingers twitching ever so slightly. It was like he was waiting for something. I glanced at the paper in my pocket, the one with the rules. The words echoed in my head. Always offer a drink before they ask. So, I reached for a glass, my hands moving almost on their own. I grabbed the bottle nearest to me and poured a drink without even thinking about what it was. The amber liquid caught the faint light as I slid it across the bar toward him. The moment the glass touched the counter in front of him, he moved. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out and wrapped his fingers around it. Then, he looked up at me for the first time. His eyes, man, I can't even explain it. They weren't angry or sad or anything you'd expect. They were empty, like he was staring right through me. He gave a small nod, took the drink, and sipped it in complete silence. I didn't know what to say, so I just went back to wiping down the bar, pretending not to notice the way he kept glancing at me from the corner of his eye. He stayed for a while, longer than anyone else, but he never said a word. When he finally got up to leave, he placed the glass back on the bar and walked out as quietly as he'd come in. That was when it hit me. He hadn't asked for the drink, not once. He hadn't even gestured for it. But the moment I poured it, it was like I'd fulfilled some kind of unspoken agreement. It felt automatic, like I'd been trained to do it, even though I'd never worked in a place like this before. The rest of the night was quiet. I cleaned up, double-checked the rules in my pocket, and watched the clock tick by. Time. It was weird here. You know how time usually flies when you're busy or drags when you're bored? At the Midnight Vessel, it was neither. It just stretched like it was hanging in the air, waiting for something to happen. Each second felt heavier than the last. By the end of the shift, I was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. Who were these people? Why did they come here? And what was the deal with these rules? I didn't have any answers yet, but I knew one thing for sure. This place wasn't just a bar, it was something else entirely. One night, the bar felt different, quieter, in a way that made every sound sharper. And that's when it happened. It was Sam's first night behind the bar with me. He was one of those guys who thought he could handle anything. full of energy and confidence. Fresh out of college, he said he'd taken the gig to save up for a road trip he'd been planning for years. He had this easygoing attitude, cracking jokes and asking 100 questions about the job. "Man, this bar's got some serious vibes," he said, running a hand along the counter. "Feels like something out of one of those old haunted movies." "Something like that," I muttered, not wanting to get into it. Sam didn't seem to notice the unease I couldn't shake. He was too busy organizing the bottles and humming to himself, his movements brisk and purposeful. "So, what's the weirdest thing that's happened here?" he asked casually while stacking glasses. I hesitated, glancing at the rules taped to the wall behind the bar. "We don't talk about weird things, Sam. We follow the rules," he chuckled, raising an eyebrow. "Rules, huh? Seems a little dramatic. What happens if you break one? Does Gideon dock your pay?" I didn't answer. Instead, I tapped Rule 4 on the sheet with my finger. If a drink spills, leave the spill untouched. Sam squinted at it, tilting his head. "Leave it untouched? What's the big deal? It's just a mess. Someone's got to clean it up, right?" I didn't reply, just stared at him. He shrugged, brushing me off. All right. Rules are rules, I guess." The night started off slow, as usual. The kind of quiet that felt heavier than it should. Sam didn't seem to notice that either. He kept whistling some tune I didn't recognize and chatting about his road trip plans. Then the door creaked open, and she walked in. A woman, pale as death, with dark hair hanging limp around her face. Her eyes were sunken, her movements deliberate and slow, like every step cost her something. She sat down at the bar without a word, her gaze fixed on Sam. "Good evening," he said, flashing her the kind of smile bartenders save for tipsy customers. "What can I get you?" I shot him a look and muttered under my breath, "Rule 1, Sam. Always offer a drink before they ask." He blinked, confused for a moment, then nodded. "Right, got it." He grabbed a glass and poured from one of the unlabeled bottles on the shelf. The liquid that came out was thick and black, with a strange, cloying scent, like flowers left to rot in the heat. The woman took the drink without a word and sipped it slowly, her hollow eyes never leaving Sam. I tried to focus on cleaning glasses, but my hands felt stiff. The atmosphere in the bar shifted, becoming denser. Even Sam seemed to feel it now, his cheerful demeanor dimming as he worked in silence. Then it happened. The woman tipped her glass too far, and the drink spilled onto the counter. The black liquid oozed across the wood, moving slower than it should have, like it had a mind of its own. Sam moved without thinking. He grabbed a rag, stepping toward the bar. "Sam, don't," I started, panic rising in my chest. "Rule 4. Leave it alone." But he didn't listen. He pressed the rag to the spill, and the moment it touched the liquid, a sharp hiss filled the air, like hot oil hitting a skillet. Sam jerked back, dropping the rag with a yelp. "Damn it," he shouted, clutching his hand. The rag fell to the floor, curling at the edges as if it had been burned. His hand wasn't any better. The skin had bubbled and blistered, black veins spreading out from the point of contact. The smell of burnt flesh hit me, sharp and sickening. "What the hell is this?" Sam cried, his voice shaky. He staggered back, his breathing uneven. The woman didn't react. She finished her drink, stood up, and walked out without so much as a glance at the chaos she'd caused. The door swung shut behind her, and the black liquid on the counter vanished, leaving no trace it had ever been there. Sam leaned against the wall, still clutching his hand. "This place? What is this place?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. I didn't have an answer. All I could do was stare at him, the weight of Rule 4 sinking in like a stone in my chest. Over the next few days, Sam's condition worsened. The black veins crept up his arm, and his skin grew translucent, like it was barely holding him together. He stopped joking, stopped talking altogether. By the fourth night, he didn't show up for his shift. When I'd cleaned the bar before, I always followed Gideon's instructions. He'd shown me how to handle spills during my first shift, never directly, always with a special absorbent powder stored under the counter. You sprinkle the powder over the spill and wait until it hardens before sweeping it into a metal dustpan. "The powder neutralizes whatever's in the drink," Gideon had said, his tone flat but serious. "Just make sure you don't touch it, and you'll be fine." I hadn't thought much of it at the time. I figured it was just some industrial cleaner, the kind you'd use to deal with strong chemicals. But now, after what happened to Sam, I realized the importance of that method. He just grabbed a rag and wiped it up like it was nothing. That small mistake, the kind anyone could make, was enough to seal his fate. My thoughts spiraled to Lily. Was she caught in something like this? Had she made a mistake, broken a rule she didn't even know existed? The questions gnawed at me, and I couldn't hold them in anymore. I stormed into Gideon's office, slamming the door behind me. He looked up from his desk, calm as ever, a cigarette dangling loosely between his fingers. "Something on your mind, Ethan?" he asked, his tone infuriatingly neutral. I didn't waste time. "What is this place?" I demanded, my voice trembling with frustration. "Why do these rules exist? Why did that drink, whatever the hell it was, do that to Sam? And my sister, was she caught up in this too?" Gideon exhaled a thin stream of smoke, setting the cigarette down in a cracked ashtray. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers as he studied me for a moment. "This place," he said slowly, "isn't like anywhere else, Ethan. It's not just a bar. It's a threshold, a crossing point for things that don't belong in the world you're used to. The rules aren't here to make sense. They're here to keep the balance. If Sam broke one and paid the price, that's on him." "And Lily?" I pressed, my chest tightening. "What about my sister? Is she part of this balance?" Gideon's expression darkened, and for the first time I saw something in his eyes that looked almost like regret. "I can't give you the answers you want," he said quietly. "But if she found her way here, she might have been looking for something she couldn't handle. You want to find her? Follow the rules, keep your head down, and maybe, just maybe, you'll get the chance." His words left me cold, but I knew he wouldn't say more. Gideon wasn't the kind of man who gave out explanations freely. Whatever truths he was holding on to, I'd have to uncover them myself. A week had passed since Sam's horrifying accident, and the bar felt even heavier with its secrets. I was more cautious now, watching every move I made, double-checking the rules in my mind. I couldn't afford to slip up, not here. That night, the man walked in. He was unlike any other customer I'd seen. His suit was tattered, like it had been dragged through dirt, and his hair was wild, sticking out in chaotic tufts. He slid onto a bar stool, his movements slow and deliberate. Something about him put me on edge. Remembering the first rule, I grabbed a clean glass and poured him a drink before he could even glance my way. A simple shot of whiskey, the same thing I'd been pouring for most customers. I set it on the counter in front of him, careful not to meet his gaze for too long. He didn't touch the drink. He just sat there, staring at it with an unsettling stillness. Then, without warning, he started humming. The sound was low at first, barely audible over the hum of the bar's old refrigerator, but it was enough to make me glance up. His lips barely moved, yet the tune grew louder, sharper. I froze, suddenly remembering the rules. Rule number 3. If a customer sings, cover your ears immediately. I didn't hesitate. I quickly pressed my hands against my ears to block out the sound. Maria, one of the servers, was busy behind the man and hadn't noticed him start to hum. She froze when she heard it, her body stiffening as she turned to look at him. But it was too late. By then, the humming had turned into a full-blown melody, dark and wrong, twisting in ways no music should. "Maria!" I shouted, but my voice was muffled by my hands. She hesitated for a moment, her hands trembling as she reached for her ears, but she couldn't move fast enough. The man's song became louder, more intense, and Maria's face contorted in pain. Blood began to drip from her nose and ears. It wasn't much at first, but it quickly became a steady stream. Her hands shot to her head, but she screamed silently, her body shaking uncontrollably. I wanted to rush to her, but I couldn't hear anything clearly with my hands over my ears. I didn't even know what was happening outside of the chaos in my head. Then the man stopped singing. The silence hit me like a wall. The air felt thicker, heavier, and I could finally hear Gideon's voice, though it was distant, distorted by the ringing in my ears. "Cover her ears," Gideon barked, but by the time I glanced up, he was already moving. He was faster than I expected, swift and sure, grabbing Maria by the shoulders and pulling her away from the bar. She didn't resist. She could barely move. Gideon dragged her toward the back, her blood staining the floor behind her. I stayed where I was, my hands still clamped over my ears, not daring to remove them until I felt the danger had passed. The man had disappeared, just like that. One second he was there, and the next he was gone, leaving the stool empty and the untouched drink still sitting in front of him. Maria never came back. I didn't ask what happened to her. At that point, I knew better than to question this place or its rules. Then one night started like any other. The bar was quiet, with just the low hum of the neon sign outside and the faint clink of glassware as I cleaned up. I was behind the counter when I saw her, Lily. She was sitting at the far end of the bar, her head lowered, her dark hoodie pulled up just like the last time I'd seen her. My heart stopped. I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but the more I stared, the more certain I became. "It was her, Lily?" I called out, my voice trembling. She didn't look up. I dropped the glass I was drying and hurried around the counter, my feet moving before I could think. My sister, the reason I was here in this godforsaken place, was right in front of me. When I got closer, she finally looked up. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Ethan," she whispered. Her voice was shaky, almost childlike. "Help me, please." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I froze, my mind racing. Rule number 2, never touch a customer no matter what. But this wasn't just any customer. This was Lily, my sister. How could I follow the rules when she was right there, begging for help? I reached out, unable to stop myself. "Lily, it's going to be okay," I said, my voice cracking. My hand closed around hers. Her skin was icy cold, like I was gripping a block of frozen metal. Relief washed over me for a split second. She was real. She was here. But then everything changed. Her face shifted, her features distorting in ways that didn't seem possible. Her eyes turned black, like twin voids, and her mouth stretched into a grotesque grin, wider and wider, until it looked like her jaw might snap. "You shouldn't have done that," she growled, her voice no longer hers. It was deep and guttural, dripping with malice. The room's temperature plummeted. The air grew heavy, suffocating, as if the darkness itself had weight. Black veins crawled up my arm from where I'd touched her, burning like liquid fire. I tried to yank my hand away, but her grip was unrelenting, inhumanly strong. "Lily," I screamed, but the thing in front of me wasn't my sister anymore. The darkness swallowed me whole. For a moment, there was nothing but the searing pain in my arm and the sound of my own panicked breathing. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it was over. I was lying on the floor, gasping for air, my arm throbbing. The veins were gone, but the burning sensation lingered like a cruel reminder. Lily, or whatever that thing was, had vanished. Gideon stood over me, his expression unreadable. He didn't say a word, but the look in his eyes said everything. I'd broken a rule, and now I understood what that really meant. Gideon finally broke his silence. His voice was heavy, the weight of years of secrets pressing down on each word. He didn't look at me as he spoke, just stared at the ground like he couldn't face the truth either. "Ethan," he began, his tone grim, "you deserve to know the truth. Lily, she was here." My heart sank. The air felt like it had been sucked out of the room. "What do you mean, she was here? When? What happened?" He sighed, running a hand over his face, as though trying to wipe away whatever haunted him. "It happened the night she disappeared. She was here, working a shift. I told her about the rules, just like I told you. She didn't listen, not fully anyway." I clenched my fists, anger and grief bubbling inside me. "What rule? What did she do wrong?" He finally looked at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't place. Regret, maybe even guilt. "Rule number 5, at closing time, check the bar stools. If one is missing, find it before you leave." I stared at him, confused. "Bar stools? What does that even mean?" Gideon shook his head. "This place, it's not just a bar, Ethan. It's a trap, a feeding ground. The thing that lives here, it thrives on the rules. When you break them, you open the door for it to take you." I felt a chill run down my spine. "So, what happened to Lily?" "She noticed a stool was missing that night," Gideon continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "She thought it was just misplaced. Went looking for it after closing time, ignoring my warnings. She found it, but it wasn't just a stool anymore. It was bait. The entity claimed her, Ethan. It took her soul, bound it to this place. What you saw, what you touched, that wasn't your sister. It was it, using her form to draw you in." I felt like I was going to be sick. My stomach churned and my vision blurred. "You're telling me Lily's gone? She's not here anymore?" Gideon's silence was answer enough. I staggered back, gripping the edge of the bar to steady myself. My sister wasn't just gone. She was trapped in this place, consumed by something I couldn't even begin to comprehend. "What is this thing?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "Why does it do this? Why does it need these rules?" Gideon shook his head, his face grim. "I don't know exactly. I've been here long enough to learn the rules, to see what happens when they're broken, but I don't know why this place exists or what that thing really is. All I know is it feeds on us, on our mistakes, our fears, and once it takes someone, they don't come back. Not really." I sank into a chair, my mind racing. Lily hadn't just disappeared. She'd been stolen, twisted into something unrecognizable. And now I was caught in the same trap, teetering on the edge of the same fate. But one thing was clear. I couldn't let it end like this. I had to find a way to break this cycle. For Lily, for myself, for anyone who might step foot in this cursed bar next. While working the nights after I broke the rule, the bar seemed to change. I started noticing things I hadn't before. Faint murmurs that seemed to follow me, cold spots that clung to my skin. The whispers were relentless now. At first, they were faint, like the hum of an old fridge, but as the nights dragged on, they grew clearer. Distinct. They knew my name. Every time I thought I was alone, they would start again, cold and distant, wrapping around me like invisible hands. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think. The bar felt like it was closing in on me. One night after cleaning up, I was rearranging the bottles on the storage shelf when my hand brushed against something. A thick, dusty notebook wedged behind the old cabinet. I pulled it out, my fingers trembling slightly. The cover was cracked leather, the edges worn down like it had been handled for years. I opened it. The pages were yellowed and brittle, scrawled with handwriting that was barely legible, like someone had written it in a hurry, or in fear. At first, it was just gibberish. Notes about strange incidents, snippets of rules I already knew. But then, near the back, something caught my eye. The ink on the last page seemed fresher, darker than the others. I read it aloud, barely above a whisper. "When the clock strikes 3 a.m., leave through the back door. Don't look back, no matter what you hear." The words sent a chill down my spine. My heart pounded, and the air felt thicker, colder. The ink on the page seemed to shimmer, almost alive, as if it were pulsing in time with my heartbeat. Why hadn't Gideon told me this rule? Was he hiding it on purpose? Or had he thought I wasn't ready to know? I stared at the page, my hands gripping the notebook tightly. This felt different from the other rules. This wasn't just about surviving another shift. It felt like an exit. A way out of this nightmare, but the whispers grew louder, circling me, mocking me. "Ethan, you can't leave, not like this." I slammed the notebook shut, my breathing ragged. I glanced at the old clock on the wall, 2:45 a.m., 15 minutes until 3. Was this my chance? Or was it just another trap? I didn't know, but I was about to find out. The moment the clock struck 3 a.m., I couldn't wait a second longer. My breath quickened, and my hands trembled as I grabbed my jacket and bolted toward the back door. I didn't think about the rules anymore. I didn't care. This place had taken everything from me. My sister, my sanity, and now my very soul. I had to escape before it was too late. I swung open the door, my heart pounding, and stepped into the cold night air. It felt wrong. The world outside was too still, too quiet. I barely moved a few feet before I heard it. "Ethan, don't leave me." The voice was unmistakable. It was Lily. I froze. My chest tightened, and for a moment I almost turned back. Almost. But then I saw her face. It wasn't right. The reflection in the glass door showed her, but her smile wasn't the one I remembered. It was twisted, too wide, and her eyes, they were black, endless holes. A chill ran down my spine, and I slammed the door shut behind me, my heart racing. I ran, not daring to look back again. The night was empty, the streets silent, but I could feel the bars pull, the weight of the curse hanging over me like a dark cloud. I didn't stop running. I couldn't. When I looked back, the bar was gone. It wasn't there anymore, just an empty stretch of highway. The midnight vessel had vanished, like it had never existed, leaving nothing but the night and the echoes of what I had left behind. I stood there, alone in the darkness, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. My body ached, my skin burned with the black veins that still crept through me. I didn't know if I was free, or if I had just stepped into a different kind of trap. But as I stood there, I couldn't help but remember the things I had uncovered in that worn notebook. It had been there, hidden behind the bar, the truth, written in the pages of someone else's torment. The Midnight Vessel wasn't just a bar. It was a place where lost souls were trapped, bound by the rules it imposed on anyone who worked there. But it wasn't the rules that kept them there. It was the entity that lived in the darkness beneath the bar. That thing, whatever it was, fed on the souls of those who broke the rules, who failed to follow the strange demands of the place. Gideon. I didn't understand him at first. He wasn't just the bartender or the owner. He was the keeper of the place, an unwilling servant of the entity. The book had revealed everything. Gideon had been working there for decades, maybe longer. He wasn't born to run the bar, but he had been chosen. It wasn't by chance that he was there. The entity had claimed him long ago, binding him to the Midnight Vessel. He didn't want to work there, but he had no choice. He was cursed to keep the place running. Every new worker, every new soul, was another attempt to delay the inevitable, the day he would be fully consumed and replaced. The rules weren't just for the customers, they were meant to trap the workers. The bar needed new souls to feed it, to keep the entity alive. Gideon made sure of it. He wasn't the true owner, but he was its puppet. He made people work there, knowing they'd be trapped just like him, that they'd be swallowed by the bar's dark hunger, never to be free again. As I walked away, the weight of it all hit me. I knew now why Lily had vanished. She hadn't just disappeared, she had been taken by that place, claimed by the same curse that bound Gideon. She had broken rule number 5, and in that moment, the entity had reached out, using her to lure me in, to ensure I would be next. It had worked in the end, but I wasn't going to let it take me. Not like it had with her. But my mind kept drifting back to Lily. Why had she worked there? What made her choose that place? I couldn't help but wonder if she had received the same letter I did, the one that led me to the Midnight Vessel in the first place. Was she drawn in the same way, under some kind of irresistible pull? Did she see the rules, the warnings, and think they were just part of the job, like I did? Or had something else happened to her, something darker? The more I thought about it, the more questions swirled in my mind. Did she know what she was getting into? Could she have possibly realized the danger before it was too late? Was I the only one fooled by the strange aura of that place, or had she felt it too? That suffocating weight of something pulling you in, making you stay even when you knew something was terribly wrong. I never got a chance to ask her. She had disappeared before I could understand anything. Now I was left with nothing but a cold memory of her, the image of her face twisted and contorted that night at the bar. It was like she was reaching out to me, but she wasn't really there. And in the end, I realized she'd been taken long before that moment. The bar had claimed her, just like it had claimed so many others before her. I don't know if I'm truly free, or if I'm just another soul marked by the bar. I keep thinking about what I saw in that book, the warnings, the rules, the stories of other lost souls who came and never left. But the Midnight Vessel is gone, and now I'm out. I'm not sure if it's permanent or if it's just a temporary reprieve, but for now, that's all that matters. I don't know if the bar will come back, or if I'll ever be safe. But sometimes, when I drive late at night, I see that neon sign flicker for a second before disappearing into the mist. I don't know if it's real or just my mind playing tricks, but I know one thing: I will never go back. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe for more creepy tales. If you'd like to support the channel, consider buying me a coffee on Ko-Fi. Every bit helps. Links in the description.